Welcome in to Hawkeye Hangout here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. I'm Corey Barta. This is kind of a spontaneous show. I was not planning on scheduling this edition of Hawkeye Hangout for a Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. But I got about fed up with some of the news that broke earlier today, and I felt like it deserved some discussion. All right. And you can see the theme of this show. Is it time for a change? You probably noted the thumbnail. You may have read the description. We are talking about Iowa's administration. All right, I'll cut to the chase. We're talking about Iowa's administration. We're talking about Gary Barta. And for the record, I'm not going here to call on Iowa to fire Gary Barta, okay? That's not what I'm doing. I do want to ignite that conversation. I think it's fair to question whether or not there needs to be a change there. I think that line of questioning has been fair for years. And what happened today with the release of a podcast through the university, mind you, that unveiled some thinking and some planning, some action from a Mr. Gary Barta, who is in charge or is supposed to be in charge of Iowa's athletic department, to me is very indicting and is very concerning. Okay. And I want to talk about that today. So before we get into the nitty gritty here, and by the way, this is a call-in show, folks. This is a call-in show. So I wanted to make this a platform for all of you to be able to give me your opinion. Okay. So again, I'm not coming on here to say that Gary Barta needs to be fired. I want to hear what you think. Okay. I'm going to provide you some facts. I'm going to provide you some information, and certainly you can draw your own conclusions. Okay. So before I do anything, before I get into any of the information that I want to share, and I did take some time this afternoon. This did take some time to do. I gathered some information. A lot of it I could have recited by memory. I don't want to do that. I want to actually get you information. I want to cite cite sources and be able to give you the history of what has been, I think, a very, very bad example of PR. And it's been over so many years now that I think this question, is it time to make a change, is more than valid. Okay. It's absolutely more than valid. So I'm going to open up the call line here. 515-635-1601. 515-635-1601. If you're watching this show, before we get into the nitty gritty, if you're watching the show, please share it on social media. Please hit the like button. Please do that. That helps immensely. Hit that like button. If you have not already subscribed to the channel, subscribe here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Iowa coverage throughout the off-season, post-game shows through the winter. Subscribe right here from the Hawkeye of the Storm, and you'll continue to get free Iowa Hawkeye sports content and coverage all year long. What's better than free Iowa Hawkeye coverage? All right. Let me get to the data, or I should say the information that I wanted to kind of run through. So we know that the article today, if you have not already read the number of articles that have been written in response to that podcast interview, it was a podcast interview, Gary Dolphin speaking with Iowa AD Gary Barta regarding NIL, regarding the transfer portal. Okay. And there have been a number of articles now that have turned into national headlines that have been written over the past, 5 to 6 hours. And it's not going away. Okay. It's turned into a national story like that. And that's what Gary Barta does. You put your foot in your mouth, and I do believe he put his foot in his mouth. I'm sure he'd probably double down. If we had him on the show right now, he'd probably double down. But to me, what was said today is very, very dangerous. Very dangerous for the Iowa Athletic Department as it stands right now. Do want to get to these comments before we start. Dr. Nigel, well, we call him Dr. P. The best we can get is the Rose Bowl or another New Year's Six. Otherwise, it's the Outback Bowl. It's the same show every year. We're always the dog left on the front porch when it comes to the college football playoff. Jarrett's here as well. And Nick says, what's better than free Hawkeye coverage? Well, since you asked, a national title in football. There, I said it. I had to say it, but that's the only thing better. Well, I would love that, Nick, and I would gladly go away and hide in my little hole. I'd find a hole to hide in if that meant that Iowa would win a national championship in football. So if somebody can tell me, is it going to be beneficial for me to go away and hide? If that means that Iowa is going to win a national title, I'll be happy to do that. So thank you for being here, Nick, as always. Okay, so again, the Gary Barta situation, let's just hop right into this. And I'm hopeful that this is going to work. I'm going to make this full screen for everybody. And I'm hopeful that we can run through this information without too much of a headache. Tried to present this sort of in a systematic way. This is not presented, by the way, in chronological order, but what this is sort of a breakdown of what I call Barta blunders. Okay. And I have not really gone on the record and talked too much about my opinions on Gary Barta in the past, but I do believe that it's fair. All right. Let's see if we can make this happen. Maybe. All right, there it is. So, number one, get rid of this banner for folks. Still operating left-handed, so I've got to kind of peruse the different banners to find the right one to take down. Okay. So this is what I call Barta's blunders part 1. So if you're not familiar with some of these, that's fine. I had to refresh my own memory on some of the many blunders of Gary Barta. So this is back in 2018, early 2018. It was the 17-18 basketball season. Okay. So through a Freedom of Information Act request, information was discovered that Fran McCaffery had been given an extension that had not been announced to the general public. Now, interestingly enough, Land of 10 is the media outlet that reported this, that filed for that FOIA. They filed for this Freedom of Information Act request, and they find this out in the midst of a 12-12 Iowa men's basketball season, a season in which they had started 3-8, and it didn't get any better. Okay, that was a disaster of a season, and it appeared, once again, we're talking about PR and optics, right? This is all about optics. I keep using that term on Twitter because that's what seems like Iowa can't get a hold of. They can't seem to figure out PR. They can't seem to figure out optics and how important those things are. We're dealing with recruiting, and we're dealing with committees on the college football front and so many things here, right? So this is what the Cedar Rapids Gazette had to say. The basketball season started, and so Barta decided to wait to announce this extension, which was signed on November 29th, 2017. That decision has been heavily scrutinized, and yes, it was, and rightfully so. The Hawkeyes at this time were 12-12, 3-8 in the Big Ten. It's not been a contract extension kind of year for McCaffery. Now, here's what Barta had to say at the time. He says, I know people are questioning me. I can't speak to how people feel about my credibility. I think over 12 years, I've proven that I care. Every time I make a decision, someone is upset about it. So if over 12 years enough people have been upset about enough of my decisions, the word credibility, I can't answer that. I show up every day and I make decisions based on what I think is best, what I think is right. Most of the time, hopefully it's right. Sometimes it isn't perfect, but we keep moving forward. Okay, so that was number one. Again, if that was the only thing you wanted, you could reason, okay, Gary wanted to wait until after the season. I know Gary had gotten cancer earlier in the fiscal year back in November of 2017. So you can kind of understand they had, according to what Gary Barta told the Cedar Rapids Gazette, they had gotten to the final stages of contract negotiations prior to the season starting. Gary Barta then takes a leave. Iowa basketball tanks. And then this Freedom of Information Act request gets released or gets submitted, and then the information gets released. But again, if you're Gary Barta as the AD, I think you have to have some foresight, right? You have to understand that if it is public information, and this is, that you have to be able to have some foresight. And Gary Barta seems to lack that. At least he did in the late stages of 2017, early stages of 2018. All right, number 2. And again, these are in no particular order, folks. Kirk Ferentz allowed to award Chris Doyle with Assistant Coach of the Year honor 3 months after Rabdogate. 3 months after Rabdogate. Now, if you don't remember Rabdogate, I'm not going to go into a huge conjecture about what Rabdogate was. But here's what the Daily Iowan had to say. Doyle faced prior controversy. This is actually written after he was accused of racism a couple of years back. Daily Iowan says Doyle faced prior controversy in his Iowa tenure when in January of 2011, 13 Iowa football players were hospitalized with rhabdomyolysis, a rapid destruction of skeletal muscle that releases proteins into the bloodstream, which hinders the kidney's ability to clear toxins after a high-intensity workout led by Doyle. The State Board of Regents commissioned a panel to examine the outbreak of rhabdomyolysis in the football program and the athletics department's response. Let me remove this and get to the next screen here. Sorry for the delay on this. Let's get that out of the way. There we go. The State Board of Regents commissioned a panel to examine the outbreak of rhabdomyolysis in the football program and the athletic department's response. The 5-person panel found no negligence with the coaches or staff. 3 months, though, after the rhabdomyolysis incident, Iowa head coach Kirk Ferentz named Doyle the recipient of the team's inaugural Assistant Coach of the Year award. Bad optics. I don't know how you allow Kirk Ferentz, and I do have a lot of respect for Kirk Ferentz. I know people have attacked me recently because they believe my criticism of Kirk recently means that I don't have respect for the guy. That's not the truth. I do have a lot of respect for Kirk Ferentz, and at this time I had a lot of respect for Kirk Ferentz. But to name Doyle the Assistant Coach of the Year 3 months after all these players get seriously sick was I don't know if that was what you call doubling down or being rebellious on the part of Kirk Ferentz, but Gary Barta allowed that to happen. Bad optics. Just bad optics. Number 3, Iowa loses, and this might be the biggest one, folks. Iowa loses a discrimination lawsuit versus former senior associate AD Jane Meyer in the amount of $1.43 million, settles another lawsuit with Meyer, former field hockey coach Tracy Griesbaum, in the amount of $6.5 million. Now, here's a brief summary from SB Nation, and I know SB Nation, I'm not going to comment on them, but this is information that is solid, okay? This is not just them making things up. This is real information. SB Nation wrote on August 4th, 2014, Barta fires Tracy Griesbaum 2 weeks before the season starts due to allegations of abuse. There was a huge backlash from the field hockey community and the players on the team. Jane Meyer, Griesbaum's domestic partner and senior associate athletic director, was reassigned from the athletic department to oversee the construction of other university buildings, still doing recovery from the flood of 2008. Let's share our next segment here. All right. Continuing that, in February of 2015, 3 field hockey players file a formal Title IX complaint against the university. In July of 2015, Jane Meyer files a civil rights complaint with the state. In November of 15, Jane Meyer files a discrimination lawsuit against the university. The university report that was made, and it was completed, stated that there was no real substantial evidence at all of anything coming close to being fireable. This information came out in January of 2016. In February of 2016, Gary Barta gets a contract extension. In the same month, the Department of Education starts an investigation into the university over gender bias based on the Meyer-Griesbaum complaints. Griesbaum then files a discrimination lawsuit against the university. In May of that year, the jury unanimously finds in Meyer's favor, awarding her $1.43 million we brought up earlier. Later in May, the university settles all further lawsuits with Meyer and Griesbaum for $6.5 million, which means those two women do not have to work for the rest of their lives if they don't want to. If they don't have to, right? They don't have to. So that's Exhibit 3 or Exhibit C. How about number 4? And this is the last one I'm going to go real deep into, but certainly you may have recollection of other blunders that you are more than welcome to share. And this is the one that just happened today. And I'm just going to read you an excerpt from the Cedar Rapids Gazette. So Barta goes public with pursuit for abolishing the transfer allowance, the one-time transfer allowance. This is a quote from the Cedar Rapids Gazette. And this is Gary Barta speaking here. Okay, if we can't totally control name, image, and likeness, then let's go back and put a 1 year. If you transfer, you can transfer. You don't have to lose your scholarship, but you must sit out a year because we can control that. So if we can't can't totally control name, image, and likeness, then let's get rid of the one-time transfer rule because that's something we can control. So an attempt to control what you can't control by controlling something else. I don't really know how to describe that. Now, I want to make this clear because I knew people would probably interpret my feelings on this incorrectly. I am not claiming, or I am not with the viewpoint that NIL and the transfer portal is a done deal and that nothing needs to change. Clearly, there needs to be change, right? Players are basically being allowed to transfer for a 6-figure salary in some cases. That's called pay for play. That's not what NIL is intended to do. But the NCAA doesn't know what they're doing. As always, they never know what they're doing. So they got backed into a corner. The Supreme Court told them they had to act, so they acted. But once again, nothing is regulated. And Gary Barta is right. It does need to change. But what benefit does it do? What benefit does it do the university and Gary Barta and Fran McCaffrey, specifically Fran, but really anybody in the athletic department right now, for your AD to go on the record saying that he is openly advocating against the one-time transfer rule? You know what that does? That's going to deter any transfer. If NIL and Iowa's lack of NIL preparedness wasn't already deterring transfers from coming here, and by the way, Fran McCaffrey's been very, very, very outspoken about the need to go get a transfer big man. But if those things weren't enough, if NIL were not enough, playing in a cold state like Iowa and whatnot, if those things weren't enough, well, Gary Barta sealed the deal by saying that he's actually, you would be coming to play at a school in which the athletic director is trying to take away the reason you're transferring. These guys are transferring so they can benefit from NIL and so that they can play right away. Or I should say because they can play right away. A lot of these kids wouldn't come here, wouldn't even consider coming to Iowa if they weren't able to play right away. And guess what? Fran McCaffrey, I guarantee you, would not be as involved with big men in the portal if they weren't eligible to play right away. That is a fact, okay? I'm not going to get into why that's a fact. I think we all know the reasons why. Based on roster makeup, Iowa needs a big man this year. That's clear. So Gary Barta going on the record, I don't know what benefit that does to the university. And if you want to advocate behind the scenes against it, fine. That's great. He told Gary Dolphin today that he went down to Scottsdale, Arizona and had some meeting with people, I'm guessing other administrators. That's fine. But again, what good does it do to your university? You've already set the university behind because you were not prepared for the world of NIL. And now you're setting them behind even further. Let's take our first call. Thank you for calling from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Who's on the line?
This is Doug from Ames, Iowa.
Hey, Doug.
Hey. Yeah, it's just kind of funny. Like I told you before, I'm from Ames. I'm from Central Iowa. And just a couple weeks ago, I ran into Jamie Pollard at the South Duff Target. And I was just thinking, man, our AD at Iowa is not even half as good as this guy. If you listen to the 1460 Kicks interview that Keith Murphy did, it's just night and day, the two athletic directors, and the lawsuits, everything. I mean, we are a lot of times too loyal at Iowa. We've had 4 ADs, not in my lifetime, in my father's lifetime. Boris Eversetsky, Bump Elliott, Bob Bowlesby, and Gary Barta are all the athletic directors in my father's lifetime, and he's nearly 60.
And listen, for the record, as you know, I'm an Ames guy as well. I don't like Jamie Pollard, but I think anybody who wants to argue the fact that he has been a breath of fresh air to Iowa State is just in denial. He has been. You're right. He's the type of advocate you want for your university, and he's had a couple blunders over the years as well. He got tossed from a youth athletic event, I believe it was a basketball game several years back that made the news, and that didn't look great. But for the most part, he is behind his university. And Gary Barta, to me, is giving off the vibes that he's really not too concerned with helping Fran build a roster that's strong and with helping Fran get to the next level. Because as I said on Twitter earlier today, if you are, and I understand that there's talk that Iowa's got an NIL collective in the mix. That's fine. We can keep talking about that, but until it's done, it's not done. But you can sit and complain all you want about NIL, about the transfer portal. You can say it's killing college athletics. Okay, fine. It's killing college athletics. But guess what? The rule is in place now. The rule allows you to use boosters and to use private corporations and businesses and private donors to basically recruit people. Okay, that's basically what's happening. And schools are going to get away with it because the Supreme Court allowed the NCAA to open things up, and the NCAA didn't know how to regulate it. So it's part of the rules. You're not breaking the rules by having donors give money to players to come here. Now, the NCAA is trying to step in now. They're reactive. We know they're reactionary with everything. But if it's part of the rule now, why would you not just act within the rule book? As opposed to complaining about the rules, complaining about how we need to change the rules. Like, you can try to change the rules, but when the rules are in place, you better act within the rules and take advantage of what other schools are taking advantage of, or you're going to fall behind. And I hear a lot of
you can't be playing checkers when everyone else is playing chess.
Right.
I mean,
you're right.
It's not. A lot of times it's just we're behind the times. You said that before. It's just they're slow on making decisions, or they just do things that are just, I don't know. I mean, it's just weird. Like I said, I have a weird perspective. I've been an Iowa fan since 1993. As like when I went to the hospital there, and a couple of the student athletes visited me, and I fell in love with Iowa athletics at that point, and came back to Ames and was a Hawkeye. And it's just amazing to see the growth of Iowa State. And, because when I was little, and I've said this before, it was 70-30 down to Des Moines. 70% was Iowa fans, 30% Cyclone. Now it's 50-50. And I don't know why that is. I mean, I'm not saying Gary Barta is the reason why a lot of people have not in Central Iowa stopped being, Hawkeyes, but, it is, there's an image problem. Like you said, there's a huge image problem.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to. This stream is not supposed to be about Kirk Ferentz, but I know Kirk Ferentz went on the air, and we talked about this with Mark Rogers on our weekly show on his channel a couple weeks back. Kirk Ferentz went on the record on KCRG and basically said that he hates the transfer portal. He hates how NIL is what NIL is doing to college athletics, but not once, at least in the segment that I saw, did I hear him talk about how they're going to adjust to it.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't hear it. So we just complain. Meanwhile, everyone else is like Cole. Good point by Cole here. He's bringing up Nebraska, and Iowa fans don't want to hear this, but he brings up Trev Alberts, has said many times he doesn't like the NIL or the transfer portal, but he has said it's his job to make sure we are ahead of the game and be prepared. That's exactly the mindset you need. Am I wrong?
Yes. And the thing is, we want to compete. We can whine. That doesn't make us more competitive.
Right.
Like people, like you even said, if we as fans can complain, oh, they're spending millions of dollars. Well, we need to figure out a way to have a couple $1 million ourselves then. I don't know. If you're saying that these poor SEC schools, because I was really upset and I shouldn't have been when the guy chose Mississippi over Iowa, but these poor SEC schools cannot be. Mississippi's a poor state. They can't be richer than us. I mean, I'm not.
It's got nothing to do with
Iowa.
money. It's got nothing to do with money available. I had some guy reach out to me on Twitter. Oh, you're just apologizing for Fran. What the heck does Fran have to do with any of this? Fran is only listen, Fran's not going to be. You want Fran? I guess people want Fran to be calling CEOs and CFOs and owners of big corporations. I mean, seriously, these other universities are working. Iowa's got one hand behind its back in all this. And these other universities are actually working hands-on with these big corporations and with these big donors. And this is an organized, I don't think people realize how little help Fran is getting with this as it relates to the recruitment of against the NIL. And Fardaws Aimaq didn't come to visit to Iowa because Iowa didn't have an NIL offer in place. That's a fact. He did not come even to visit because Iowa couldn't offer him an NIL deal. The kid from Ole Miss, that one, I don't know that I ever got a firm explanation as to why, but certainly Ole Miss, the word on the street is that they have something NIL related. I don't know any other schools that are as behind as Iowa is in all this. And maybe there are schools out there, but it's not, I don't know how you put that on Fran to just start calling corporations and donors and asking them to get involved. Is that not the administration? And if it's not the administration, then who is it if it's not Fran? Because I don't believe it is Fran.
I agree with you completely. And, like I said, that's the reason why I wasn't like, I had to take him in and go, this isn't his fault if he doesn't have the tools he needs to land recruits. That's not his fault. I mean, it's hard to recruit if you have a disadvantage. And right now it seems like we have a disadvantage. And I don't know. I mean, we going back to what I said, we can complain all we want. I just want to be competitive. What do we have to do to be competitive and get recruits in here? I know we develop a lot of 3-stars in both sports, but it would be nice to land 4- and 5-star recruits. I don't think all of them, we can't miss on all of them, but again, I mean, no matter what, our rosters will be filled, but it's easier when you have more talent.
Well, let's just, Doug, let's just look, before I let you go, let's just look at the here and the now. The here and the now is basketball, right? The biggest need, I believe, as you know, I believe the biggest need for Iowa athletics in the transfer portal is actually a quarterback, but nobody seems to agree with me on that. So I'm not even talking about quarterback. I'm talking about basketball, men's basketball, specifically a big man. Iowa needs a big man. And I was told weeks ago that Iowa was in a good position with Fardaws Aimaq and that Fran was going all in on the kid. But see, the problem is these other schools brought up, they were able to flash some fancy green money to a kid who probably has not had much in his life. And do you really blame a kid? Like, I don't know how hard it is. That's another thing that I tweeted out yesterday. Is it really hard to believe that a kid, when offered 2 Power 5 programs to play basketball in front of thousands of people, okay, and be able to play the sport he loves, if he's got an option between doing that at Ole Miss, for instance, and getting paid $50,000 or playing at Iowa and not getting paid squat, what is he probably going to take? Are you really going to turn down $50,000 so that you can come to Iowa City? I mean, and maybe the argument can be made that, well, Iowa has got there's a better chance Iowa develops you into a pro product. Okay, maybe. But are kids really thinking about that? Or are they looking at those 5 figures and saying, hey, I want $50,000 or I want a free truck? Like, this is the beast that was unleashed. And I'm not blaming Jordan Bohannon, but he was behind a lot of this. This is the beast that was unleashed because the NCAA was not prepared for it. But again, that doesn't matter. The fact is it's here. It's how college athletics has changed drastically. It's here. It's not moving anywhere anytime soon, I don't think. So if you fail to take advantage of it, if you fail to work within the confines of what the rules state now, you will fall behind. And that's exactly what's happened with Iowa. Iowa can't land a big man, Doug. the one position where they've really excelled. I mean, they just had a National Player of the Year 2 years ago in Luka Garza, and they can't fill the position. Is that not absurd to you in a year where the transfer portal has been more active than ever before?
Oh yeah, like I said, I just want to be competitive, and I thought next year's team would be better than last year's team. Still do, and I don't know what Chris is doing in the draft. That all seems weird to me, but I just like I said, I just want us to be competitive. We shouldn't be 20 years behind the time. We can't just complain and whine about how everything's unfair. We got to figure out a way to be competitive. We're not a small fan base. We're not losers. We can be competitive. We can get recruits. If it comes down to whatever we have to do as fans with a collective or whatever, I mean, I'm not a rich person, but we got to be competitive somehow. And we also can't lose. Again, going back to your initial thing, I do think it's just time for maybe looking at some people like Gary Barta to maybe look for someone more modern. So thank you, Corey.
Appreciate it, Doug. Appreciate the call as always. And yeah, I think Doug is echoing what a lot of people in the fan base are feeling right now. And that is, it seems like there's this stubbornness to evolve and, adjust with the times. And college athletics is changing at a faster rate than ever before. And so perhaps, just perhaps, it might be time to say, hey, this ain't working. We need someone who is more forward in their thinking, progressive as it relates to athletics. Thank you for calling from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Who's on the line?
Hello, Corey. It's the Real MVP. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Drill MVP?
I'm doing good. Now, be honest with me. How shocked were you that I wasn't first?
Oh, well, I went on my little spiel first, so I thought maybe you'd fall asleep during it. So not too surprised.
Oh, man. Well, I'll be honest. The reason I wasn't first is I was waiting for you to put the number up, and you never did until somebody called. I was like, man, you gotta be kidding me.
You don't have the number memorized?
I do, but I don't want to, like, when somebody goes on a big spill or something like that, I don't know when the phone lines open up.
Sure. Well,
so I just wait for you to post the number.
Yep, Doug got you beat today.
Yeah, I know. Congrats to him. Well, I think Doug hit on the largest issue. I think if the Iowa director, one of their head coaches, is going to get fired, it isn't going to be because of the lawsuits or anything like that. It's going to be because they're going to fall behind in the NIL and transfer portal.
Yeah, and let's be honest, the lawsuits and I mean, like the Chris Doyle situation, that doesn't rest solely on Gary Barta, and I'm not claiming it does, but we're just stating the facts that these are the things that have happened over the years. And
right. Well,
let's be honest, Drew MVP. Let's be honest. You could also bring up the fact that Gary Barta has continued to allow nepotism in the football program. Is that a claim? I think. Am I the enemy of the state now because I use the word nepotism as it relates to Iowa football? I mean,
no.
Hasn't he allowed that?
Yes, he has. In my opinion, he has. Anyway.
Absolutely. He's allowed it. That's what's happening. That's why Brian Ferentz is the OC and the QB's coach. Because the administration's allowing Kirk Ferentz to promote his son despite underperformance. And that's what we call nepotism when it's your son. That's just a fact. Whether you like it or not, doesn't mean I think Kirk Ferentz is the worst person in the world. I still think he's a really good man, but blood is thicker than water. And it's Gary Barta's job as the AD to say, no, Kirk, we're not doing this. This ain't working. But see, that's not what Gary Barta has done. He's allowed it. He's enabled it. So that also can be added to the list of complaints.
Well, let me ask you this, Corey. How long do you think it'll be before they change athletic director?
That's a good question.
I have a feeling this isn't a prospect that isn't going to happen anytime soon.
You have a feeling it's not going to happen soon?
No.
I don't know. Iowa does have a fairly new president. Okay.
I understand.
Here's what I fear, and I'm going to talk about this on future shows. You're a college basketball fan, right? You have seen Lon Kruger walk away as he saw the college athletics landscape changing. You've seen now Jay Wright leave. Coach K leave. Now, I don't know that Coach K, you could say it was directly because of NIL. He was certainly getting older. You've seen Roy Williams leave. You've seen Iowa assistant Kirk Spira leave. And by the way, he went on the record with the Des Moines Register last night and said that part of the reason he's leaving is because of NIL and because of the transfer portal and the changing times. But here's the deal. Who's to say, and I have no information to back that this is going to happen, but who's to say that if Fran McCaffery is working throughout this offseason to try to get a big guy, and the reason he can't is because he's got his hands tied behind his back because the administration's not helping him with NIL and everybody else has got an advantage over him. And that's a bit, Drill MVP, this might be the most significant advantage you can have in recruiting right now is NIL dollars.
If anybody wants to dispute that claim, I would just cite Texas A&M as the source.
Well, yeah, let's say Miami,
Well,
Arkansas, Texas
USC?
Tech. Yes, absolutely. USC. So even look what San Diego's doing. You realize what San Diego is doing? Steve Lavin has brought in Jaden Dallaire from Stanford, who at one time was an Iowa target, and a kid from Oregon, two of the best players in the Pac-12 last year, to play at University of San Diego. Not San Diego State, San Diego. Because it's sunny and they probably got some money, right? There's probably some money filtering to these players. So if anybody's going to claim that NIL is not the biggest advantage or disadvantage, depending on which side you're on in all this, then you're crazy. And Fran McCaffery right now, there's no question about it, is working at a severe, heightened disadvantage. That's a fact. Okay.
Yeah. Well, so, we in fairness to everybody there, this is a fluid and turbulent situation. Like, I know the NCAA released new regulations a few days ago, which may or may not do something, but.
Well, but yeah, I don't have we'll see. I hope it does, because I do think it's better for the sport if things need to change. If they continue on, I don't know what the future of college athletics is if things continue down this path.
My fear is the future of college athletics is basically like the USFL.
Well, that would be a problem. That to me, that's going to drive a lot of fans away. And now, again, the NCAA, we got to realize too, is going through a leadership change with Emmert stepping away, but that's not happening right away. So, can they get a guy like a Barry Alvarez or a guy like Nick Saban? I don't think it'd probably do it, but down the road to lead this thing and maybe appoint a czar for college football. That's a topic Mark Rogers has discussed, but that's just college football. I'm talking about the entire NCAA and these issues. But my fear is not that Fran McCaffery is going to retire due to NIL. My fear is that he's just going to leave. If he gets if he gets an offer somewhere, and I don't know, I don't think there's probably any significant openings right now. But like, hey, Boston College opens up, say Wake Forest were open. I know it's not because they've been strong, but say Wake Forest was open. I've been told in the past that Fran McCaffery has kind of looked around at times. That's before all this NIL stuff happened. So if the administration, from everything that I've been told, this is the case, if the administration is really holding Fran back, and I have no reason to believe that information is not true, if the administration is holding back because they're stubborn and they haven't gotten a collective going and they've been resistant to NIL and to the transfer portal, then who's to say Fran doesn't get fed up and says, you know what, if I'm going to be working at a disadvantage here, why am I staying here? I'll take my kids and we'll go somewhere else.
Scenario.
Say it again.
That would be worst case scenario.
But who's to say that won't happen, Drill MVP?
Oh, I'm not saying it won't happen, but I'm just saying that's worst case scenario.
And I don't think Fran McCaffery, for the record, I would love to be able to ask Fran this directly, but I don't think Fran McCaffery probably is in favor. I almost guarantee you he's not in favor of how NIL is set up right now, even though Jordan Bohannon was.
Nobody is.
No, I don't. Well, I think there might be some coaches that are.
Here's the thing why I'm saying nobody is. You have the new NIL regulations, from what I understand. Now, granted, you need basically an interpreter to understand legislation at this point. But from what I understand, it says boosters in the college directly can't pay for players. However, there's state laws that say they can. So you have conflicting messages, and nobody likes conflicting messages.
And let's keep this in mind. people who say, well, this has always been happening and now it's just happening above board. Okay, yeah, there was always money being passed. We get that. It was being passed under the table. But you combine that now with the one-time transfer exception or allowance and the fact that now it's not against the rules, it's more prevalent than ever, and it's increased exponentially. So if you at least have a rule, even if you're not great at enforcing it, it will deter some of that tampering and the pay for play concept. And so, yeah, those things do need to change. And I don't think Fran McCaffrey is in favor of much of this, but if Fran given Fran's personality, and I'm just guessing on this, but given Fran's personality, I would guess that he wants this NIL collective in place right now. I mean, why wouldn't he? He realizes, like we just talked about, that this is the rule. These are the confines of college sports now. So if we don't want to get left behind, we have to be able to act within the rules and take advantage of the rules. And
right, you got to use the rules.
There are plenty of dollars around Iowa City and around that program. There are a lot of big donors. There's no other pro sports teams here in the state, so people love Iowa basketball and Iowa football. There is plenty of money. So it's not the fact that, it's rural Iowa. That's a farce. It's the fact that the university has not been proactive. They were behind the 8 ball, and that's their own fault because other schools seem to be prepared for it. I just mentioned Miami. You mentioned USC, Texas Tech. All these schools were ready, and Iowa wasn't. Iowa State was ready. I mean, think about that. Iowa State's they've got 2 kids from St. Bonaventure who are highly touted transfer portal targets, one of which is already committed. Another one was on campus, a guy that Iowa was in on, Osuni. And Iowa can't even get him to visit. And the fact that they can attract, the fact that Iowa State can attract major transfer portal targets and Iowa cannot tells you that Iowa State was actually ready for this, whereas Iowa was not. And Iowa State also lost one of their top guys. I get that. That's the nature of the transfer portal now. But the point is, Iowa was literally, I don't know how you can get this far behind. And Iowa found a way to do that. And you got to put a lot of that on Gary Barta.
Yeah. It's frustrating, and it's all just a giant mess, unfortunately. Like the one-time transfer waiver. I mean, I've followed players from my school of Kentucky who went here, then transferred somewhere else, then got a waiver and transferred somewhere else. Everybody gets waivers nowadays, so it doesn't even feel like the one-time transfer rule is a rule. It's more of a suggestion.
Well, and that's the thing. Players, like you said, they were being handed waivers in excess before, but now that you're just saying, it kind of goes back to the deterrent ideal. You're now just saying, well, you don't even have to go through the work of applying for a waiver. You're just eligible. And so that's just causing more, literally exponential growth in the transfer portal. So yeah, it's a combination. This is a wicked combination right now of having the NIL doors completely opened up, having the transfer doors completely opened up, and it's created free agency.
Right. There is no off season anymore in college sports. You used to have an off season when it came to college basketball, a little bit less when it came to college football, but now every day you got to be out on the recruiting trail. You got to be out and trying to get businesses to get NIL money together. It's all hectic, and this isn't something that everybody just stumbled upon one day. Everybody knew this 5, 6, 8 years ago. And that's the really frustrating part, at least for me.
Well, how frustrating is it, too, when you think about one of your most well-known athletes and one of your most vocal athletes, Jordan Bohannon? He was at the forefront of the fight for NIL. Think about that. Jordan Bohannon, whether you like him or not, was at the forefront of these discussions with national leaders. And yet his school is the one, I'm sure there are others, but is one of the few that has no idea what it's doing with NIL. How ironic. And how, just depressingly ironic.
Well, you know what else is sad? And this is underreported, but I doubt anybody other than Kentucky fans know this. Oscar Tshiebwe won the National Player of the Year unanimously Well, he's not an American citizen. So nobody knows whether he can get or he wasn't born in America. He is an American citizen. Sorry about that. But nobody knows whether he can get NIL money or not because he wasn't born in America.
So
why is that the case if you're...
Why did he come back?
Honestly, I have no idea. I'll be honest. If I was him, I would have left and went to the pros.
Well, is it far-fetched to think that possibly he's getting money under the table?
I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that at all. I mean, I know he had a meeting with the senator, one of our senators, to try to get in state law or federal law or some type of law to say people born outside the U.S. can get NIL money. But the fact nobody thought of that as a potential issue, especially for basketball, which is going worldwide now. I mean, you look at the NBA, the top 3 MVP voters were all from foreign countries. It's baffling. Well, Corey, that is unfortunately all I got for you today, man.
All right, sir. Enjoy the calls as always.
Yeah, no problem. I'll give you some positive to end it off, okay?
Okay.
Iowa's currently a 6-point favorite against Iowa State in football.
They've already got the lines set?
Oh, they've got all the lines set for all the big games.
Well, it is in Ankeny, so I'll give them that.
Yeah.
All right, sir. Have a great night. Appreciate the call.
No problem. You do the same.
Appreciate your real MVP as always. Bob Sanders for Iowa AD says Nick. And boy, Bob Sanders, little guy, right? But not little in heart. He is one of the hardest hitting Iowa players in the history of Iowa football. No question about that. Let's take our next call here. Thank you for calling from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Who's on the line?
Lomansky, Corey.
Lomansky.
A shout out for DeRio answering the Oscar question about why he's staying in school. And I'll give you my opinion why he's staying in school. Because, if you're a young man and you're driving a beat up car and you like the college life and you're getting paid big bucks, I'd stay at Kentucky too, Oscar. Don't blame me a bit. But I'll segue into why I called, Corey, is that you and I have bounced back and forth about optics and what things look like. And I just flashed into my head what Gary Barta talked about when Licklider was fired, and he fielded a lot of questions why. And I guess the optics of that, he kept going back that kind of defending his in my opinion, my sole opinion. He kept going back about defending Licklider and why he hired him in the first place. I would just march on. And my second thing I want to talk about, and still this is all AD related. When part of Hayden Fry's conversation with Kirk Ferentz was just make sure that you know that we care about farmers. And if you win over the farmers in Iowa, that's what drives the economy. You'll be all right. And any time that Kirk is interviewed in his office, right behind him, he sits in these 2 chairs all the time. Behind him is a big picture of Kinnick Stadium, and embroidered in the back of him it says America needs farmers. That to me is a credibility to Kirk. He understands where he works and what the state's about. And getting back to Gary Barta and that optics matter, I think anytime you run a business, and the 2 things that are out front now is Gary Barta was the chairman of the NCAA tournament. When they announce all the teams and he meets in the room, and he's the number 1 guy. Now he took this position. Maybe I'm naive and I'm a simple fan that doesn't know everything, but I suppose there's something to say for image. But I didn't really like that. I thought with COVID issues, the amount of workload, take care of your coaches, tend to your knitting. It's nice to have outside involvement, but your main job is to support your coaches. So he went through COVID. Then he took the chair of the NCAA tournament committee, and now he's out front talking about the most controversial issue in sports. He's got assistant coach turnover in basketball, which is expected, but maybe Fran needs some help. Can he do something for Fran? He's got a controversial thing going on the offensive side of the football at Iowa, where he's a smidgen away from taking the image athletics department from, I should say, competing with Michigan, Ohio State in football and the football playoff. And here you're involved with, there's got to be enough for him to do inside the department instead of being outside the state of Iowa and being, I guess, my opinion of great leadership. You take care of the people you're supposed to be taking care of first and make sure things are smooth. And I think his time could have been a lot better spent inside the Iowa program. And golly, he's sure an experienced guy, but I just can't figure out where he's spending his time and why. And does he really think his programs are at such an elite status that, man, things are rosy? I mean, most businesses, because of COVID, they've cut out a lot of this extra curricular activity as far as business leaders and their troops, their employees, their staffing needs help. So I'll bounce that off you. And I applaud your journalism. I think your journalism background is showing up. It's kind of interesting that there's a podcast covering the Vikings, and it's kind of like same old. Don't we want to take the next step and try to compete for a Super Bowl instead of bowing to the Packers? And I'm not too thrilled where Gary Barta is spending his time, and I'll shut up and listen to you.
Well, it's a lot, Lomansky. I will say this. And I'm not disagreeing with anything you just said. When I have talked to Iowa fans in the past, and I've heard even media people bring this up, and maybe Lomansky, you've heard this. What do the apologists say to defend Gary Barta on all these blunders? Because there are a lot. And I did see this comment. I didn't want to skip over this comment earlier in the chat from Nancy. She says, this happens in other colleges too. Yes, Nancy, you're right. Some of these things do happen, but we're talking about a pattern of behavior, a pattern of gaffes. Okay, we haven't even gotten to the last three that I had marked down. But the one thing that the apologists, or the ones that are defending Gary Barta through all of this, use is fundraising. Everybody keeps talking about how Gary Barta is a terrific fundraiser. Lomansky, have you heard that before?
I have heard it. I don't really believe it, but I've heard it.
Well, here's the deal. And I am not a big donor. Okay. Probably never will be. But judging from the conversations that I've had with people that understand the U of I fan base much better than I do, and the big donors and iClub members, etc., you'd have to be a monkey not to be able to fundraise as the AD at Iowa. And I mean that seriously. What are we comparing this to? So the landscape has changed drastically since the Bob Bowlesby era. Okay. There is so much more money now, even than there was then. I do believe you would have to try in order not to succeed or not be successful on the fundraising trail in Iowa. So I applaud Gary Barta for apparently doing really well with fundraising over the years, but let's not just defend all these other problems that have crept up over the years, because there's no reason to think that any AD that's got his head on straight would be able to raise plenty of money towards the athletic department. And the other thing that Gary Barta has working for him, and again, I've never said on this show that he needs to be fired. I'm not taking that stance necessarily. But the other thing that has developed over the years, over the last few years at least, is Iowa athletics, as the individual sports are concerned, for the most part, are having a nice amount of success, right? You've got track and field doing better than it has in a long time. You've got Rick Heller doing really well with baseball. You've got Fran just winning a Big Ten championship. I get fans are upset about March and the tournament, but he did just win a Big Ten championship. You've got Iowa football coming off a 10-win season. They won the West. And you just go down the list. Even look at wrestling. The non-revenue sports are doing well for the most part. The one sport that really has struggled is volleyball. They got a new coach there. Perhaps that will change things. But that will be what his defenders fall back on, is the success of the individual teams. And basically, I will say this. Gary Barta has done a nice job hiring some of these guys. Joey Woody was a tremendous hire. And I get it, he was an Iowa guy, but he's a tremendous hire. Rick Heller was a tremendous hire. Fran McCaffrey, I'm a Fran fan. So those are pluses. And yeah, I don't think you can just say, well, he got lucky. Well, maybe you say that. Maybe he got caught lightning in a bottle, but he does get credit for hiring those coaches. But again, as these problems continue to mount, and the millions of dollars that have been lost to lawsuits because of either not good practice or just negligence with paperwork. Think back to the Tracy Griesbaum and Jane Meyer situation. All that could have been probably avoided had the problems that at least were claimed against Jane Meyer, Griesbaum. Am I right? Griesbaum, Jane Meyer, one of the two, had been documented properly, and they weren't. And so Jane Meyer, they weren't documented properly. So all these things, it's just whether it be PR or whether it be just being organized. I think about the sports that were canceled here a year ago. And the report was that Gary Barta went in and announced this to these different athletes and literally was in the room for like 2 minutes and then told his helpers that they would answer the rest of these players' questions. These players got their sports ripped out from under them, and he couldn't give them more than 2 minutes to take questions. That's just this. That makes me more angry than anything. And so it's a pattern of behavior, and that's why I thought this stream was worth doing.
I really, really appreciate you bringing up to the sports cuts. Your job of university presidents and athletic directors is to serve the student athlete that pays money to go to your school, that can go to University of Northern Iowa or Iowa State or the U of I. I'm an Iowa graduate. Came within a hair of going to Iowa State. Iowa had a top 20 business school. I'm glad you bring that up. That may be one of his worst mistakes. Don't tell me we have to cut sports at one of the financially most profitable football programs in the Big Ten, even though we're one of the smallest. And I guess I got to do a shout out to Iowa State, who didn't have the benefit of attendance and money through their football program, that invested in facilities in this arm race. A shout out to University of Northern Iowa under Mark Farley and their football program that gave them the stability and profitability to reinvest in their programs. I just hope Iowa fans don't get too comfortable in their passenger vehicle of Iowa sports and not look to your right and left to UNI and Iowa State that are built on in-home athletes, because your AD really serves an important role to help those coaches to keep improving facilities, having a good image. And I'm really glad you brought up those sport cuts, because I was in intramurals at Iowa, and that might be his biggest PR blunder. Don't tell me we didn't make enough money that we couldn't have had some semblance of coming out and saying, hey, we first looked at cutting 3 or 4 sports. We saved 2, that communication sucked. I'll shut up and listen to the rest of the show, because you've got a lot of important stuff to cover today. And, I just hope, what's insulating is that Bob Bowlesby and really Bump Elliott, who I want to start with. Bump Elliott told Hayden Fry that if his hire didn't work, he'd be fired before Hayden Fry. I'll never forget that. And I tell you what, Barta has been insulated from a great, well-attended, faithful fan base, improving facilities because of a successful program. And he didn't, he didn't hire Hayden Fry when friends come to Iowa without Bump Elliott. And, Gary has a pretty cushy seat to be sitting in from day one. That's my opinion. I'll shut up and listen.
Appreciate the call, Lemansky. Thanks for the call as always. And yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. And look, Bob Bowlesby, say what you want about Bob Bowlesby, but I liked Bob. I can't say Bob Bowlesby. That's a tongue twister. I cannot say anything bad about Bob Bowlesby. And I understand, could it be that certainly I think realignment played a factor in his decision to step away as commissioner of the Big 12, but just the trajectory of college athletics as he went on the record. I don't believe he has went on the record to say why he stepped down. But no, I appreciate all that, Lemansky, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Thank you for calling from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Who's on the line?
This is Zach. How's it going tonight?
I'm doing okay. Zach, how are you?
Doing pretty good. I did like your little funny comment about getting a quarterback out of the transfer portal, which will never happen.
Okay. Hold on a second. Now, I want to ask you, you're an Iowa fan, correct, Zach?
Oh, yeah, die hard.
Okay, so how long have you been watching my show?
A couple months now.
Okay, so you've probably heard me on the transfer portal shtick before. And when you say, well, it's never going to happen, and you're kind of dismissive of it, are you dismissive of it because you don't want it to happen, or are you dismissive of it because you don't have faith it would ever happen?
I don't have faith they'd get a quarterback out of the portal just because I hate saying who would want to come to Iowa to play quarterback with that lagging offense.
Okay. So, but you would be, correct me if I'm wrong, if you had the choice of getting a playmaking quarterback from the portal, you would take that, right? If you knew he wanted to come here. Okay. I just wanted to establish that because I know some people actually believe that it would hurt Iowa, and I've never understood that line of reasoning. So I'm glad to know that that you feel the way you do.
Yeah. I agree with you too. I do feel bad for Fran. It's not his fault. He couldn't get Fardaws. He couldn't get the other one. And I'm assuming probably they won't potentially not get Trey Mitchell. And if I was him, how do I recruit someone when I got nothing behind me saying, here's why we want you to go here, but we got nothing to get you here.
Right. And like I say, is there any reason to think that Fran may get fed up with the lack of support from his own administration?
Oh, I could see it. And it could also actually trickle down to other sports. I don't see much on. I know they try to market Caitlin Clark as much as they can because, goodness gracious. But
yeah,
I think it could feed down into other sports. I know you talked about Iowa baseball. That Rick Heller's built one heck of a program there, and I hate seeing that go down because of NIL or field hockey was number one for most of the year. You hate seeing stuff potentially happen there. I think they're just so behind the times. And, while it's great, to have the stories like the Iowa Wave and all that stuff, there's just nothing, I don't think, to really market either their best players. And I know there's been chats on other message boards about potentially we need to get rid of Carver Hawkeye. Yeah, it's an older arena. Yeah, it's a heck to walk up those stairs. But I do think they need to do more of the marketing aspect as well to get people to even go to those non-revenue sports. I go to them because occasionally I sing the national anthem for them. It's fun to do it, but it's hard watching the Iowa baseball team, who is number 3 in the Big Ten, I believe now, and not get many fans. I wish they could market to those more, and I understand some of it's in the afternoon, so students may not be able to go, but yeah, I don't think there probably would have been enough money to keep Keegan Murray at Iowa because I think he was a foregone conclusion.
Sure.
But yeah, I've never been a Gary Barta fan, and I do think that potentially, Iowa could use kind of a refresh.
Yeah, and
get a new voice in there and all that stuff.
I totally get where you're coming from. And Zach, can we both agree that there is money to be used in Iowa City? It's not that the money's not
heck
there.
Yeah.
There is plenty of money available out there. And so it, like you say, it doesn't fall on, you can't fall back and say, well, it's rural. It's it's, people from the outside may think it's just Hickville, Iowa. That's not the case. There is a lot of money around the Iowa fan base with Iowa donors, big corps in the area that I guarantee you would give tens of thousands of dollars to help this cause. And so I don't know who else you look to right now that has fallen short. And I've heard people say that it's Kirk Ferentz's fault because he's not jumped on board. And I've been told that Kirk Ferentz is part of the reason why things haven't moved forward with NIL quicker, because it's just not a concern of his. Well, that is a problem, and shame on Kirk Ferentz if that's true. But again, if you're Gary Barta, you're allowing your head football coach to infringe on the progress and the progression for every other sport, including men's basketball, which is also a significant revenue sport. Shame on Gary Barta. And ultimately, it comes down to Gary Barta. So the money's there to be had. I agree with you. I've never been the biggest Gary Barta fan, but it's been this over and over and over again. And now I am honestly afraid for the Iowa basketball program, because I was confident about a month ago that Iowa would get a big man in the portal, and I'm growing less and less confident, and I'm hearing less and less as far as Iowa contacting big men. I mean, I don't know where you go from here unless Iowa can get their tail out from between their legs and do something. There's going to be problems. You have one bad recruiting cycle. You know this, Zach, from following Iowa sports. One bad recruiting cycle, and I'm talking the transfer portal is a recruiting cycle. This year's transfer portal is a recruiting cycle in and of itself, because there are schools like Iowa State did last year rebuilding with the portal. And even though I don't like that and it's not ideal, schools like Iowa State have made it work. If you completely swing and miss in the transfer portal this year, it can set you back from years to come. That's my fear.
Yeah, and I think fans' fears too, and it could be worst case scenario, is not saying it'll happen like what happened at LSU, but you'll lose the best players, and I don't think it would happen with someone like Caitlin Clark, because I think she's got a lot of NIL deals. I know at least one with Hy-Vee, and I think she's making good money in other places. But yeah, what would happen if someone with the pedigree that she has would leave Iowa because of an NIL? Fans would be so up in arms.
Right.
You got probably the best marketed basketball player going to be next year. Someone who Iowa could take advantage of marketing, and I just don't. I see them falling short as far as all that stuff. I like what the women's basketball program did last year with marketing free tickets to get fans, because normally they didn't get full houses, and now they are. Caitlin Clark has a lot to do with that, and that team has a lot to do with that. They were getting, I think, more attendance than the men. And yeah, like I said, I wish Keegan would have stayed. He's not. I hope Chris does stay. I've seen off and on, yes, no, maybe. But yeah, as great as Philippa Bracha was at sometimes last year, I know you said it on your show, he's not a 5, he's a 4. And he was just trying to do the dirty work like Connor McCaffrey was, trying just to guard anybody and everybody and just get ran over.
Right.
And who knows if Agundale will be who he should be, or Riley Mulvey, but they need someone to come in, because who do you have besides Perkins, Sanford, PMAC? I know they're high on DeSante Bowen. If Josh Dix might be healthy, that could be another good fit.
Big if.
When you've got no one inside except for Bracha, what else are you going to do?
You better hope Riley Mulvey and or Josh Agundale just take a massive, massive step. One of those guys has to, if they don't get anybody in the portal.
Right. And the same thing I know you said with football, the nepotism with Brian. I don't know if we'd be talking about it if Iowa went undefeated and won a national championship. But, Iowa fans had hope after they beat Penn State, and then it just came crashing down. And some of that is, their offense is predictable. Some of it's just Petrus wasn't good. And I wish they would give more chances to Padilla and Labus, but Ferentz is very loyal.
To a fault, right?
Yeah. And, kudos to the defense last year who did everything that they could. You can't play great defense for 60 minutes when you're on the field for 50.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And they can't keep up with that 5 turnovers a game they were causing, which was just unbelievable to watch. Kudos to Phil Parker and all the defense, because they were put in so many rough spots that sometimes it was just like, yep, like eventually that barn door was going to open. That defense was going to start to struggle when you have no offense.
Absolutely.
And I'm hoping that Petrus shows something this year. I'm not confident, but who knows? I didn't see Iowa going undefeated until Penn State last year. So anything can happen, I guess.
The way to stay positive, Zach. And, the thing about Caitlin, I may add this before I let you go. Caitlin Clark, you brought her up. I don't have a grave fear of her leaving, because I think she's so marketable just by herself. I don't think she needs the University of Iowa to market her. She's able to be marketable to national, even international brands, because of how she plays and how transcendent she is. That's the advantage Iowa has with her. I think they're going to be able to get away with being behind the curve, because she doesn't need that. She's her own person, and regardless of the name on her jersey or the school on her jersey, she's able to profit, and good for her. More power to her.
Yeah, because I think I've seen all the From the Logo T-shirts, which is awesome to see. Yep. And watching from they're getting all these generational talents out of nowhere. Kudos to Lisa Bluder with Megan Gustafson and now Caitlin Clark. That it's nice to see more than 5,000 fans in attendance. I loved seeing the full house at the NCAA tournament and the other games, and I hope that continues. And I do hope they do kind of make improvements to the facilities as well, because those are much needed. Yes, those big fancy the big fancy TVs at Carver are great, but those steps are ridiculous.
Yeah. And it's I get it. It's hard and that's a discussion for another day. It's going to be hard to change things. I do think the steps are going to be an issue. I think regardless, I don't see them sticking a middle mezzanine in there. I don't know the construction from a structure standpoint, if you could even do that. Yeah, you're right. There needs to be changes there too. And again, it seems like the athletic department is kind of just, the athletic department as a whole seems satisfied with where things are. The problem is you can be satisfied with where things are, but now you're going to actually go backwards because you are satisfied, because everyone else is moving forward. Yeah. And
it's one thing if you're satisfied if you're making the Final Four every year.
Right.
It's another thing when you're satisfied with, okay, well, we made an NCAA tournament again.
Yeah. I hear you, brother.
Let's get it farther. Who would have thought Iowa would have had 2 teams win the Big Ten tournament championships? No one. At least from my point of view. I didn't think Iowa men's would have had a chance with the gauntlet they had to go through. Yeah, women had a better chance of doing it, and I think they just had the lineup to do it. But I just hope that Iowa can get more on the curve, because if Fan gets fed up enough with assistants leaving now and with a couple players leaving, that I could see him saying, I'm not dealing with this anymore. If you're not going to get behind me, bye.
I hope that doesn't happen, but I agree. That's my biggest fear as it relates to Iowa basketball right now. It's not even the big man issue. It's can Iowa even retain Fran? So I hope that's just a fear, and I hope that's got no basis.
Yep. Well, have a great evening. Nice listen. Good listening to you.
Appreciate the call, Zach, and thanks for listening. And certainly, great calls this evening by everyone who's called in. And before we get to our final 3, and we've got about 10 more minutes here, I'm going to stay alive, but I want to get to the final 3 blunders by Gary Barta that certainly rub me the wrong way, that I do believe ignite this discussion. Before we do that, I want to thank our sponsor. Had it up here a second ago. Under the Kitchen, Randy Engel down in Mitchellville doing fantastic work. Authentic Hawkeye, original Hawkeye player artwork. Visit Facebook for more details. Under the Kitchen. Thank you, Randy, for sponsoring this. And do want to throw our attention over to a brief message for Randy Engel and Kinnick Under the Kitchen. We will be right back. Heard of the real-life Hawkeye man cave known as Kinnick Under the Kitchen? Well, after lots of hard work, there's not much space left to paint, but the walls are exploding out for public consumption. Under the Kitchen is proud to announce that you can now purchase exclusive prints of some of your favorite Hawkeye legends, including wrestling great Spencer Lee, football players Tyler Goodson, Riley Moss, and Drew Tate. Plus, an all-in-one Murray family legacy print featuring Keegan, Chris, and Kenyon Murray himself. Signed and unsigned prints are available, making the perfect collectible or gift for any Hawkeye enthusiast. For more information on purchasing one of these outstanding Hawkeye prints, visit Under the Kitchen on Facebook. That's Under the Kitchen on Facebook. So appreciate Randy Engel and Under the Kitchen for sponsoring this show, this edition of Hawkeye Hangout, and this channel from the Hawkeye of the Storm. I do want to, before we head out for the day, get to these final three exhibits. That's what I've been calling them, exhibits from Gary Barta that raise this question. If it's time to move on and make a change here in leadership in this athletic department. So we're on number 5 here. We talked about the first 4. If you missed those earlier, you can go back after this video posts. But number 5, Iowa paying Chris Doyle $1.1 million to leave. And yes, this does not fall solely on Gary Barta, but ultimately transgressions of Chris Doyle fall on his shoulders, right? He is overseeing the entire athletic department, and the allegations that some of these and listen, I'm not going to comment on the lawsuit. I understand a lot of fans don't agree with the lawsuit. I certainly don't agree with the way a lot of these players are going about trying to fix the problems. It seems like there is a money grab involved here. But again, I'm not going to comment on the mistreatment because I wasn't there. And there certainly have been substantiated claims of mistreatment, whether you want to call them racial or not. And the bottom line is Chris Doyle was at the forefront of that. And this was occurring for years, allegedly, right? It's occurring for years. Now, Chris Doyle certainly denied ever having any racial undertones with any of these mistreatments, but they were mistreatments, whether they were racially motivated or not. Again, it was allowed, and Iowa $1.1 million to get Chris Doyle out the door. The handling of Gary Dolphin's faux pas. You may recall Gary Dolphin at one point thought his mic was off, and during a timeout made a kind of a insulting comment about Iowa and recruiting, specifically about Macy Daly. I know Gary personally. Gary is a very good man. I have no doubt that he deeply regretted those comments. I think Gary was kind of saying what a lot of fans were thinking. No offense to Macy Daly, but recruiting-wise, I think a lot of fans probably agreed with those comments. But he deserved to be disciplined for that. The second comment that was made was about former Maryland big man Bruno Fernando. Gary Dolphin compared him to King Kong. Certainly there are some there's some stereotypes out there, unfortunately, and some racial history there that makes that comment very insulting. I don't think Gary Dolphin meant it in an insulting manner. I think it meant it as actually a compliment. But Gary Dolphin, it was right to discipline him, but to suspend him for the entire year, there was a lot of controversy. I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but there was controversy with how Gary Barta handled the Gary Dolphin situation, especially some of the other transgressions that have occurred and have come up over the years with Iowa athletics. To lay the hammer on Gary Dolphin, again, just knowing who Gary Dolphin is as a person, it was unfortunate, but that's up for debate whether he handled that correctly. Number 7, Iowa canceling the 4 sports. I brought that up earlier. Speaks for a couple of minutes with athletes before having staff members answer questions. That's according to the Des Moines Register. Cancels 4 sports, leaves these students high and dry, and then speaks with them for just a couple of minutes before leaving and having staff members answer any follow-up questions. And you see number 8, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are other things. There was some controversy with the rowing team. I thought the addition of women's wrestling, although I don't have any problem with women's wrestling being added, but after you cancel 4 sports and then you add women's wrestling, that I can see why there are now, ever since those canceling of those sports, there have been, and I don't even know the status on the legal status on the efforts to bring those sports back. But there were some Title IX complaints as it relates to the canceling of those sports. So it's just one thing after another. And again, there are things we didn't get to, but that's where this conversation comes into play. Joseph says, between the defense and special teams, no other offense had a more favorable start or opportunity to put up points, and we still ended up being one of the worst offenses in the country. And I saw somebody earlier in the chat comment about Brian Ferentz and how he is a result of Gary Barta, his shortcomings. I get that. I'm not denying that at all. I mentioned that earlier. Gary Barta is the guy who has allowed Kirk Ferentz to continue to promote his son within, despite underperforming on the football field. That's a fact. And the offense has consistently underperformed under Brian Ferentz. I don't care what happened before Brian Ferentz. The fact of the matter is they have underperformed every single year. M. Finn says, if the university keeps expecting Fran to do his job with one hand tied behind his back, he will move on, and he should. And M. Finn, I would hate to see that happen, but I would not blame Fran if he moved on. Jeff, Dan Gable said the longer things stay the same, the longer it takes to get caught up with everyone else. Wise words from Dan Gable. All right. If I missed your comment earlier, I apologize. We do have time for one more call. Last call on the telephone line before we head out for the day. Appreciate all the comments this evening, all the chats, all the calls. It has been a fun show, and it's been a while since I've jumped on here for an edition of the show. So appreciate everybody. I do want to remind folks that I am here every Tuesday. I'm actually over at the Iowa at the Voice of College Football channel with Mark Rogers every Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. We're taking an early look at the Iowa football schedule. This past Tuesday, we looked at South Dakota State. So we'll look at Iowa State this coming Tuesday. We'll look at Nevada as well coming up. Just about 12 weeks, actually 11 weeks now, I believe, until the start of fall camp. So it's going to be here before you know it. So we're there every Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. A reminder that you can donate to this channel in the description below. If you want to sponsor the channel, please reach out to me either through email from the Eye of the Storm at outlook.com, or you can message me through Twitter and Facebook. All right, I think that does it, folks. Call line is sitting dormant. Appreciate everybody staying here for the last hour and a half. Subscribe, hit the like button, and I will talk to you very, very soon.